Warning: the following episode of That Mental Ginger Show contains strong language and adult themes.
Alright, troops.
Hello, and welcome to That Mental Ginger Show with your host, Andrew Durning, aka The Mental Ginger. Well, my 6 faithful followers. This is an interesting one. We have a Scotsman who lives in Vietnam, so I'm going to have to ask him if he's a sex offender. It is the one, the only, Niall Mackay. Niall, how are you getting on, pal?
I fucked that up. I should have told you. My name's pronounced Neil Mackay.
Neil Mackay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'm on a street right down there. I fuck up everybody's name. So it just runs into it. It just hits hard because you're a fellow Scot.
It's not your fault. It's my mum's fault, man. I've had to deal with this my whole life. I've even had people who've known me for several months and they still fuck it up. So, so don't worry about that. Yeah, it's I don't know. It's like the Gaelic spelling. So because of like
the rise of One Direction would have helped.
That was it. Well, when I was growing up, it was Niall Quinn, was the football player.
Yes, Sunderland.
Yeah. So that messed me over growing up, and then now Niall Quinn from One Direction. But it's like a Gaelic spelling. So my grand's from the far north, from like Lewis. So it's technically like Niall, but Neil, but most people say Niall. So yeah. But yeah, no, I am not a sex offender. But that is a very, very valid question, because that is where Gary Glitter was actually. I don't know if that's.
We've got a double check it.
Gary Glitter was arrested in Vietnam in a place called Vung Tau, which is just a couple of hours from here. It's where he was finally captured and sent back to the UK. And it is it's definitely something that I've not been exposed to it here. I don't know anyone who's a sex offender here, but I don't think they would probably tell me anyway if they were.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a thing.
You just see a line outside the registration office. People tell you there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I did warn you beforehand that my jokes are a bit zany and inappropriate. So I apologise to everybody in Vietnam.
Who is a sex offender?
Well, not if you're a sex offender, just in general.
Right.
Well, so if you're from Vietnam, sorry, buds. So what I like to do, Neil, is get our guests to tell us their origin story. Because if there's one thing we all have in common, it's that we have an origins. So, Neil, for my 6 faithful followers, please tell us your origin story.
Oh man, where do I start? I mean, I'm Scottish. Like, this could be a 6-hour podcast if I go through, so...
We'll get you back for further episodes.
Yeah. There was a wintry night when my dad took my mum home and he had nothing else to do, so that was the origin of Neil Mackay.
Oh man, it's great to have the Scots guys on.
I don't know how far back we can go, but no, I mean, so I was
so you actually remember your sperm race? You're like, right, I was going, right, get to Katie. It's my time.
All I know is I won. That's amazing. No, so yes, I'm from Glasgow, similar to yourself. Born and brought up there, and then I left Glasgow to go to America and work in a summer camp. And I did that. Went for one summer.
You're not helping with the sex offender comparisons.
No, I left there. I went to work for one summer that turned into 5 summers, and I ended up kind of living semi-permanently in the US.
Huh?
And then from once I kind of left Scotland, I never wanted to go back, to be honest. Mostly the weather, even just this week talking to some friends back in Scotland and family, and just remembering that in the winter, as you're going through right now, that I used to go work in a call centre, and when you left for work in the morning, it would be pitch black and raining. And when you went back home at 5 o'clock, it was pitch black and raining as well. And it's so dark, and the weather, I just don't like the weather in Scotland. I mean, nobody really does, but I really hated it.
Yeah. What was the call centre that you worked in?
I worked for O2 Online Customer Services. Yeah.
Ouch.
It wasn't too bad. It was my first job at a uni. So it was full-time, my first full-time job at a university. And
What did you study at uni?
Sports science, sport and exercise science.
Man, you have a definite challenge speaking to me. I hate exercise and I'm fat as fuck. But I'm happy. So
that was part of my degree, was trying to get you to exercise, you know.
yeah, you would have failed if you took me on.
But yeah, so I lived in the US, and then from there I went straight to Australia, and I went to Australia for a year. And I was going to travel around. Well, I travelled around Australia for a year, but then ended up settling down. So ended up that turned from 1 year into 4. Then I met my wife, and then we moved from Australia. She's American, but we then moved to New Zealand.
Man, you're all over the schedule.
Yeah, and then we moved to New Zealand for a year, and then that turned into nearly 4 years. And then we decided to go traveling around Asia for a year. And we did 1 month in Malaysia, 1 month in Thailand. And then we came to Vietnam for 6 weeks, and 6 years later we're still here.
So I need to double check. They haven't taken you prisoner. You're there of your own volition. What? Because I can see what looks like a riot helmet in the background.
Well,
just making sure that I'm not going to get a sniper very soon.
Well, so I do 7 million bikes is now my business, and we do a podcast, and we do comedy, and we do events. And the reason for the name is because there are 7 million motorbikes. Well, that's a lie. When I started my podcast, there was 7 million motorbikes. Now there's over 8 million motorbikes in a city of just 10 million people. So there's nearly one motorbike for every man, woman, child. And so this is not my crash helmet. This is my motorbike helmet.
So that leads us on to 7 million bikes. So, as I say to all my guests, sell, baby, sell.
Yeah. Well, what it was, so I obviously was a big fan of podcasting, going all the way back to, like, I don't know, did you listen to Ricky Gervais and Carl Pilkington?
Yes.
Like, that was like my university kind of staple, because I had to travel to the Jordan Hill campus from Bishopbriggs. So I had about an hour bus journey every day, like 2 buses and a 20-minute walk almost to get to uni. And so I listened to Carl Pilkington, Stephen Merchant, Ricky Gervais. And then so just thought it was really like podcasting, but I think, and I wrote a blog post about it, like you can actually see the trends after that kind of phenomenon, because they were like the #1 podcast in the world. Podcasts kind of fell away for a bit, and there was a lot less interest in them.
Typical Ricky Gervais killed podcasting.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually know a guy who knows Ricky Gervais. Well, so I'm really hoping that he's not listening. But I gained a lot more respect for Ricky Gervais listening to his interview with Ross Looney's name is. And it really gave me a lot more appreciation for his style. Because I used to think Ricky Gervais were a prick. And now I'm like, mate, I want to be like you. So one interview turned it around for me.
It can happen like that sometimes. Yeah, no, I think he's great. He's switched on, and he's a smart guy, you know. So
he really is, and what I love about him is he's not forgot his roots. He's working class. He speaks the language of the people, which is very communist to say, but you know it's true. Like he speaks our language, and he calls out everybody on the bullshit. If you watch some of the Golden Globe speeches, oh man, it was brilliant.
Well, he's talked about it because he didn't become famous until he was like, you know, same age as me, I think like 38, 39. Well, he didn't.
You're 38?
I'm 39 actually. Yeah.
Fucking hell! I thought you were younger than me.
How old are you?
I'm 34.
Right.
Well, I thought you were about 24, 25.
Fuck no.
No, seriously, man.
The Zoom touches you up. That's what it is. I've got like the
right, we're going back to sex offender territory here. Like, Zoom is not touching you up, not in my watch. No, but the last guest that I had on, but she was 40 going 41. I swear to God, I thought she hadn't had puberty yet.
Was that woman, the bright woman?
That's Myra, her name is.
Oh, Myra.
Well, she's like, she said she was 40, and I was like, fuck off. No way. I was genuinely I was going to ask if you were a minor.
Well, I was just talking about it today with my wife. It's worked out well now when I'm hitting 40 and I still look so young. But I remember being 16 and trying to get into the Archies or trying to get into our Chaos and things like that, and kept getting knockback after knockback because I looked about 12. So I had friends that we were 16 and they looked 18, but I looked 12. So I've always looked young for my age. So it didn't work out well when I was trying to get in the nightclubs, but it's worked out well as I've gotten older.
Yeah, well, that's why I've got the beard. What? Because I always look quite young as well. Same, my wife is older than me, so she's going to be 40 this year, but she looks about like 23, 22.
Right.
So when we got together, she found out how old I was. And I was clean shaven, and she was like, "You need to grow facial hair. I feel like a pedo." So yeah, that's why I now look like I'm almost dead. Right. So keep telling us about the podcast.
Oh yeah. So I'd always loved podcasting, and then what happened was my wife and I we used to have the same schedules here, and then our schedules changed. So she was working on a Sunday, and I had a Sunday off, and I was just getting really bored because most of my friends, because we were teaching here, most of my friends all worked on a Sunday as well. I'd gotten a new job where I had the day off, I had the weekends off, and so I was just super bored. And one day I was kind of like, doing the dishes, and I was like, should start a podcast. How hard is it? You get a microphone, and then the other thing was, so here in Saigon, the kind of impetus as well was, especially being an English teacher myself in the beginning, you meet just basically the only people you meet are other English teachers. And there's a way more wide variety of jobs here, but in the beginning, that's the only people you meet. But as I was getting to know these English teachers, they all had just really interesting stories, as nearly everyone does, right? So some of them were fashion designers, or they'd been in a band, or they were, I don't know, whatever it is. One of the guys was like making leather wallets, and he was someone else was like studying for his law degree back home. So I was like, I want to like share these stories of these like super interesting people that, on the face of it, and you know what it's like as well. It's difficult to get to know people because you often meet people in bars, or you even friends that you're close with, but you never really have a deep conversation. You just shoot the shit, right? And
Yeah.
So I was like, I want to share their stories. So I bought myself the Blue Yeti microphone, which turned out to break, and it's like meant to be one of the best microphones, but it's still sitting in my cupboard and it's never worked since after a couple of months after I bought it. But I got a microphone, and then my friend Lewis and his wife Kim, she's Vietnamese, he's English. They came over and helped me set up the microphone. He showed me how to use GarageBand and all of this. And so, kind of as a test, I just interviewed his wife. But she had a super interesting story to tell because she'd studied in the UK, and we talked about suffering racism and things like that. Not that she'd suffered much of it, but we kind of talked about it.
Yeah.
And then we tested the microphone in another room, and so I interviewed Lewis this time, and again it was just meant to be a bit of a test, but he had all these funny and interesting stories. So those two ended up being full episodes, even though they were just meant to be like a test.
Yeah.
And then my first published episode though was with a guy called J.K. Hobson, who, so again, he was an English teacher, but he'd been in a thrash metal band back in the 2000s. He'd used to have massive dreadlocks. Like, as he puts it, they were a fairly well-known thrash metal band. So they toured the
What was the name of the band? I've got to know.
Crisis is the name of the band.
I actually have heard of that.
No way. Yeah, they're fairly well-known, as he puts it.
Well, you can tell that a weird ginger guy from Scotland knows.
I would definitely do that. Well, the lead singer is called Karen Crisis. I'm assuming that's a stage name, obviously. But she's just brought out a book like a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago. So he hasn't read it yet, but he's interested to find out what she said in it. But anyway, yeah, so he was a comedian, and now he was a comedian, and then he was in this band. So he was the first person I interviewed, and that was May 2019, and so now we are still great friends. Like, we talk, we still hang out. We're both now we do comedy together, and so from there, just in the beginning, I was kind of interviewing friends, and then interviewing other people that I knew of, kind of expats, or people were suggesting guests for me to interview. I managed to interview this really amazing, like, young journalist. She's like a reporter who was reporting on actually like sexual assault and things like this in Vietnam. She was doing reports on this, so I interviewed her, and so I got the first season done, and it went really well. And then now we're up to season 7, and then not long after I started the podcast, I started doing comedy, which was like a kind of lifelong dream of mine. So finally did it, and then so now I'm a comedian, a podcaster, MC, and make podcasts for other people as well. So 7 Million Bikes is now developed. So it went from just a Sunday hobby to now we provide English language entertainment for expats. Well, not for expats. We provide English language entertainment in Vietnam because there's lots of people who speak English here, and not just, obviously there's American, South African, British, but you also have, Japanese, Korean, Indian, every other country in the world. But the common language is English, so the content isn't just for the Westerners, the British and the Americans. It's for anyone who speaks English. So we got a lot of Vietnamese people at the shows as well.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing, man. Well, it's considering how well you've done as well. What you just started out as a wee Sunday hobby. Next thing you know, it's like, wow, we're 7 seasons in. We've got 7 million bikes. Let's do this.
Yeah, it's kind of like now. I hate to even say this, but like we kind of interview celebrities, which is kind of cool.
I love this. Name drop.
So they're like local celebrities, and I just don't really think like that. Like I don't really think of them as celebrities. I just meet them and then we do a podcast. But it's not until after the fact that then I'm like, oh yeah, they're kind of famous. So, which is quite good, I think, because it keeps it humble. Because I'm not like, oh my god, you're famous, and we're gonna do an interview. Like I don't get excited about it. It's like way after the fact, and then I'm like, oh. So one of the ones, her name is so she's like transgender, and it's really confusing because I had to speak to her about this lately. So every article that's written about them overseas genders her as a female, as a she. But in Vietnam, she's gendered as a male. She gets called he.
Wow.
So I said to her, I was like, what do I call you then? Because I'd written this blog post about it, and she's like, I don't know. I was like, what do you mean you don't know? I was like, you don't know, I don't know. She's like, you just choose. I was like, I'm not choosing what gender I'm going to write about you.
You should have just said something totally random and just be like, we've got this great toaster.
Yeah. So
I am not transphobic. Anyway, I actually interviewed a transgender.
You don't need to pick up yourself. You don't need.
No, it's also part of the person as well, because she's absolutely amazing. And she's a great friend of mine. And she's planning to go over to Nebraska to record her first country album, and I'm just really proud of her. That's so, awesome. Alexia, if you are still listening, I do think of it. But not that way, because I'm married.
Well, so this person, her name is Nikki Tran, and she's literally a celebrity chef. So she's been on Netflix. She's been on Everybody Feeds Phil. If you go on Netflix and you look up Everybody Feeds Phil, which is the guy from Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yeah.
And she's done a few other Netflix shows, and so she's a celebrity chef. And then we interviewed she's French-Russian girl called Mika Chu, but she speaks fluent Vietnamese, so she's on TV here. We interviewed another guy who's like a kind of pretty well-known YouTuber here called Phuc Map, which is his Vietnamese name. And so that, do you know what it hit? You ever seen someone that has a blue dot next to their name, which means they're like an official person on Facebook? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So we've got all of us that are plebs.
Yeah.
You've got those wee dots. It's like a wee blue tick thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like they're certified, it's them.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of when it hit, when I was having conversations with them, and I still message them and I still talk to them. Because obviously they're just normal people, right? They're not fucking, they're just people.
And we have to clarify that celebrities, I don't think they're normal people. I think there's something, we just have to find it. We have to find it, and then we can take that blue tick away. And then I won't feel intimidated if I ever interview. But I'll never interview a celebrity. Never.
Don't say never.
Well, you guys are like my celebrities.
You're interviewing me.
Exactly. You guys are my celebrities. I live vicariously through my guests. When they say,
This is it.
I've interviewed, like Erwin Shimmerman from Star Trek, or I've interviewed done music for Nicolas Cage, and I'm like, I know this guy.
Uh,
So there we go.
well, I've made a joke to my friends back in Scotland saying that, so you know how in football stadiums, normally the rows go A to Z,
Mm-hmm.
and then once you go past that, it goes A, B, B, C, C, D, D, on, right?
Mm.
And then you know how, like, you talk about Z-list celebrities, which means someone who's like a nobody celebrity.
Yeah, like a reality TV star.
Yeah, like a reality TV star.
Yeah.
So I'm like a ZZ list celebrity.
I wouldn't say that. I'd say maybe a double C.
No, definitely Z. I even triple Z. I don't know how far
Nah.
we could go back. I got
Nah.
recognized one time. My wife and I were at this Christmas market, and then this girl was like, "Oh, you're Niall Mackay," and I froze. I was like, I absolutely didn't know what to do. My wife had to nudge me. She was like, "Say hello, say something." I was like, "Hello." How do you know me? I think it was kind of a weird experience. It's only ever happened once, but yeah.
That's one more time than I've had, so don't worry about it. That's quite cool.
It was kind of cool.
Yeah. So what's the future plans for 7 Million Bikes and Niall Mackay?
Well,
He's like, well, hold on.
yeah, let me have a drink first.
Give me a drink. Give me a dibby.
It's Saturday night here, you know. It's 9:20, so it's drinking time.
In fairness, you
well,
used to live in Scotland, 9:20 a.m. was drinking
yeah,
time.
well, exactly. I'm not gonna lie. I did have a cocktail the other day at 11 a.m., so I'm not.
5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, so as I kind of mentioned to you earlier, we've just come out of probably one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. So all my events, so I do comedy shows. Before the lockdown, I was doing a comedy show every week.
Yeah.
So 4 a month. That means every week it's 4 a month. There's 4 weeks in a month, just in case you didn't get that. I don't know why I had to explain that, but
Well, for our listeners, we're just clarifying. Sometimes there's 5.
well, there is sometimes, right? But yeah, so we were doing shows and trying to build business like that, doing comedy shows and whatnot. And we also do quiz nights, and we're looking at doing other events, things like this. But then May 28th was the last quiz night we did in person. Then from then, they closed down bars and restaurants. And then from June onwards, the lockdown just got stricter and stricter and stricter. So we used to be able to go and exercise, we could go and buy our groceries. Then they changed it that you could only go shopping for groceries like twice a week at a very specific time. And then it got to the point where they brought in the military, and we had barbed wire around our complex. We couldn't leave our complex unless we had a reason to leave, which was pretty much the only reason to leave was to go and get your vaccine or go and get medication.
Wow.
Because so back in May, pretty much like 0% of Vietnam was vaccinated because we just didn't have the vaccine. So it's a developing country. It's not a poor country. There's massive inequality like everywhere. So there's some people that are living off $1 a day, as the stereotype goes. Then there are other people that are driving about in Bentleys and Porsches and Mercedes, and so there's a massive income gap and inequality. But so it's not a poor country; it's developing. It's one of the fastest developing countries in the world. But for whatever reason, they didn't get the vaccines, and we're relying on donations from other countries. So there's a scheme called COVAX. I don't know if you've heard of it. Where the wealthier nations donate vaccines and then they get distributed. So back in May, we had pretty much 0% vaccinated cases started. We had a zero COVID policy here, so there was no COVID. And anytime there was, they kind of quashed it really quickly through lockdowns and they would quarantine people, so you get sent off to a quarantine camp and things like this. We've been in one. That's another story.
That's a story I want to hear about.
Yeah, you can go on my podcast. I did a whole season from quarantine camp because I was in quarantine for 17 days, and I was like, well, I might as well podcast while I'm here. So I interviewed my wife and me and my roommate, and a couple other people and stuff like that. But anyway, so the lockdown just got stricter and stricter. So I think by late August, early September, you weren't even allowed to go out for groceries, and the military was meant to be delivering food. But that ended up not really happening. But you still couldn't go for groceries, so everyone was just scrambling to get food delivered. So we were having to rely on people to bring us food and things like this. We couldn't leave the house. So your question was about how we're building the business. Well, the business has just been decimated because of because of that. In terms of events.
Right. I'm going to get my foot,
No,
take
no,
it
no,
out
no.
my mouth, and stick it up my own ass because I feel like an absolute tit.
No. So completely not, because the good thing was I decided to take the time during lockdown to just really work on 7 million bikes. So I could have just sat back and watched Netflix every day, but instead I was like really building the business. So now I'm at the point where I actually make podcasts for other people. So I was able to pick up work where I was able to build 7 million bikes to the point where, we now offer other things. We were doing online quizzes. We were doing online comedy shows. We were able to talk to people across the world and just do some unbelievable things. And then now I've started doing voiceover work and things like this. So 7 million bikes through lockdown. Lockdown was actually really good for us. It helped us focus on our message. I did like a kind of business course with a business consultant where we were able to make the proposition of 7 million bikes going forward. So basically the whole thing was, we want to come out of lockdown stronger. If we're going to be locked down for 5 months, we want to come out of this ready to go, raring to go, in a really good position, instead of doing fuck all for 5 months and then you come out of lockdown and then suddenly you're like, oh, now I've got to start doing stuff. So we've only just come out of lockdown. October 1st was when they finally let us out our apartment. Literally, we couldn't leave the apartment. They opened up restaurants. We still can't really technically do comedy shows, but we've started doing some kind of small scale private ones. So they're not really publicly advertised, but they're very prescriptive on the rules here. So everyone has to be double vaccinated. The venue has to be at 50% capacity and things like this. So we follow all the government guidelines. We don't publicize it. We don't advertise it, but we kind of invite by word of mouth and things like this. So in terms of that, we're getting excited that hopefully things will keep opening up. The cases have gone back up, obviously, because lockdown finished, but the deaths are still pretty low because everyone's double vaccinated now. Saigon, where I live, Ho Chi Minh City, went from 0% vaccinated to 90% vaccinated within 3 months. It was incredible. At one point, they were vaccinating 100,000 people a day. The Vietnamese are amazing. There's loads of quirks about living here, and sometimes things take a long time to get started, but once it gets started, it happens immediately. So the vaccines took forever to get here, and that was partly, I won't get into it, but the vaccines took forever to get started, but once they got started, it was okay, everyone's getting vaccinated. Tomorrow, all 10 million of you, come on, we're all getting vaccinated. So,
what's better than Britain's policy?
Well, we do live in a communist country, which has its living here now, you realise, has many, many advantages, and it's not as bad as you would think.
Right. Well, in fairness, I am a Star Trek fan. Well, you may not guess by my shirt. I died anyway. But so I've always argued that Star Trek is a bit of a communist kind of style, where everybody's equal. Money doesn't exist because you work better yourselves. It was like communism done right. But now I know there actually is a communist country, because like them, but not in a racist way. I'm just really sheltered.
Yeah,
I'm like a hermit.
Yeah.
Well, I always say that. I always say to people that I work with and stuff, if I'm wanting to find out about their culture, their stories, and that, I'll ask questions that might seem inappropriate, but it's just because I'm curious. And I want to know different things and break stereotypes, all that kind of stuff. But that's obviously another story. What then people think that I'm being a racist, and I'm I'm not. I just genuinely want to know things, and my brain doesn't figure out that filter of this isn't right, don't say it. Because I think you should just say it, and if they don't take offence to it, or if they do, then you can say sorry. Always easier to ask forgiveness than permission.
In
So
some
tell me
cases.
about what it's like being in a communist country.
Totally normal. This is an unbelievable place. One is, so I'm sheltered as well, similar to you, because I'm not local, right? So my experience here cannot be compared to our locals who are not allowed to criticize the government. You're not allowed to blog about them. You can't protest. You can't speak against the government at all. You can vote for who you want within the government, but it's just one party. So you're only voting for one within one party. So in that sense, I'm probably not qualified. So I'll give my opinion from my point of view, right? For me, as an expat who is relatively privileged, as I said, there's very poor people here, and even as I mentioned, I've lived in Australia and New Zealand and the US. All these countries, I've never been involved in politics because they're not my countries. So it's pretty much the same here. Like it doesn't make a difference whether there's one party or five parties. I'm not really going to get involved in the politics because it's not my country. I'm not a citizen, so it's not really my place. As day-to-day life as a communist country, it's completely normal. It's not really. So you're saying about like everyone being equal, like it's a different view of communism. Like I think that might even be socialism. Communism just means like one party.
Right.
Socialism is what you're saying about everyone being equal and things. So like things here like
Well,
school care.
it's an example of what my kind of ignorant brain, but where I'm thinking something and it's not true. You're enlightening me on it, and now I feel better.
There you go.
So thank you.
Well, yeah. So it's a capitalist country. So they changed in the 80s, and again, it's a whole other story. They changed in the 80s to open up the country, and then America. There was still loads of restrictions on Vietnam because of the American War and things like this. But they started to ease up all those economic restrictions. So this is what I'm talking about. Like where I live, like I regularly see Porsches, Bentleys, Ferraris, Mercedes driving by me. The people I see are extremely wealthy. In Saigon, especially. Saigon is the economic hub. So, and again, it's so varied because you can drive out of Saigon half an hour and you will literally be in the countryside, and there will be people who are extremely poor, but their life is normal to them. They're not like the rice farmers and things like this. So yeah, they are poor and they don't have an easy life, but it's not like an unusual like poverty-stricken life. If you know what I mean. But anyway, in terms of living in Vietnam as a communist country, it's totally normal. It's capitalist society. It's some people are wealthy, some people aren't. The biggest thing here is you just can't speak out against the government. It's the number one rule. You just can't criticize the government.
In fairness, I'll be okay with that. Mainly because our government is a shit show. Especially in Britain. And that's all you see everywhere. It's everybody bitching about it. So if they said, look, you can't do it, or we're going to shoot you, be easier life online. So I can kind of get it.
Yeah.
But at the same
It's
time,
definitely
everybody's entitled to free speech, all that kind of stuff. Because he'd be saying this, I would be dead right now. But, but I get it, and thank you for enlightening me on what difference with communism and things like that. And also because you're such a genuinely nice guy, very well spoken, doing a lot of lovely things, I want to apologise about my joke about you being a sex offender.
So it's a good joke. I like that. It's funny.
It was a good joke, but at the same time, I don't want everybody thinking that you're the next Gary Glitter. So yeah, but you're definitely not. You're such a great guy, yeah. I'm just loving speaking to another Scot, especially someone that's in Vietnam. It's so unique.
Well, there's quite a few Scottish people here. I'm going to be interviewing. We have a Scottish scientist here. She studied at Strathclyde Uni, the same as me. I just got introduced to her lately. And I'm going to be doing, next month, I'm going to be doing a live podcast episode with her. So we do a live recording.
Nice.
She actually is like a vaccine scientist. So we're going to be talking lots about the vaccine and things like that.
Wow.
So that's pretty cool. Yeah.
That's pretty cool, yeah.
So we don't really have many anti-vaxxers here and things like this because you just, again, so this is one of the benefits of living in a communist one-party country is you just do what you're fucking told. Like there's no real debate. There's no debate. If you are an anti-vaxxer and you're Vietnamese, you're probably not going to be posting about it. There's no opportunity like you see in Australia and things like this to go out and have a protest about it. Like you'll just so. But I kind of like think that it's kind of a good thing as well. So it's really difficult because we're brought up on democracy, free speech, all of this stuff. But then you live in a country like this, and you're like,
well, you don't need to worry about like having to go out on a Saturday and run into about 10 different protests, which is what we had the climate change COP26.
Yeah.
But and I work in Glasgow.
Yeah.
And there was about 10,000 people all protesting different things. We had to get evacuated for our work.
No.
There was helicopters, and there's stuff. It was freaky as hell. It was that way. I was just like, why can't there just be one part in the tells to shut the fuck up? Well, and then the next day, there was even more protests on Saturday. 200,000 people descended in Glasgow. But and you think about how the COVID rates could have spiked from that.
Yeah.
It's unreal.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so and the way I ended that, you could have went out on a Saturday and were like, I'm cool. No worries. So what's 2022 going to hold for Niall Mackay?
Well, I'm actually going to start a second podcast very shortly.
Nice.
So it's going to be comedy based. So my podcast is called a Vietnam podcast, and I interview people, either locals, either overseas Vietnamese or foreigners who are all connected to Vietnam, right? So that's the underlying theme.
Yeah, that's the
But
niche.
that's the niche. But it's mostly the main point is sharing their story. But most of those stories are related to Vietnam. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
So one of the cool things on this last season was as well, and again talking about like not just interviewing celebrities, I interviewed. So to help enlighten you a little bit more, have you ever heard of Vietnamese boat people?
Of course not.
Yeah, I hadn't either, so don't feel bad about that. But so when the
Vietnam feel bad. So to all the Vietnamese boat people, I'm about to be educated.
There you go.
Please don't kill me.
So I'll keep it super short, but the thing is, after the Vietnam War, American War, many Vietnamese people had to flee Vietnam because of persecution and because of poverty and things like this. And so many of them got on like small fishing boats, similar to what we've seen the refugee crisis from in the UK and people trying to get to Italy. So it's like history repeating itself. But that happened in Vietnam post 1975. Many of them died. Many of them spent hours and weeks and days at sea. They were turned away from countries that they showed up in and things like that. Some of them got into refugee camps and then resettled across the world. So I've now been fortunate enough to, in the last season, interview someone who is 8 years old, fled Vietnam on the day the kind of war ended, which was not a good thing for her from her perspective because the North won. And she fled on a boat with her family, ended up in a refugee camp in Hong Kong, and then ended up in Canada. So she shared her story, which was crazy. Then we just shared the story of a woman who she was abandoned as as a baby under a bush by her mum and taken to an orphanage. And her father was an African American soldier and her mother was Vietnamese. So she's half black, half Vietnamese.
Wow. And
so that's like they're massively discriminated against by Vietnamese people because they're so obviously different. And so she was abandoned under a bush. She was adopted. Then she was adopted to the UK, and then her adoptive parents were hugely abusive. So she was abused her whole childhood by her adoptive parents. So I got to share her story, and then I've also shared the story of children of Vietnamese boat people. So these are like first generation. So their mum and dad fled Vietnam on a boat and got to Switzerland or Germany or UK or the US. So for them, they grew up in another country. They'd never been to Vietnam until now. So some of them, it's quite a common thing. A lot of the children of Vietnamese boat people are now coming back to Vietnam to rediscover their roots and find out what the country's like.
Wow.
So I've gone on a tangent, but to answer your question, so I'm starting a new podcast about comedy.
In fairness, thank you for telling me about that.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about that, up front about that. And that's just it's so harrowing to hear. But also inspirational that they're able to rise above that and wanting to have some sort of life. So, what, from a weirdo ginger guy from Scotland, please tell them that I'm very humbled by what you've told me, and very respectful.
Well, go listen to especially the last 2 episodes of the season I've just done.
Okay.
They're the most emotional, dramatic, inspiring episodes I've ever done. The last one I did, I cried, which was the first time I've ever cried during a podcast, and I've been close before, but this one got me in tears.
I'm already on 2.
You're on 2,
Yeah,
right. So check that episode. So starting for the new year, I'm starting a comedy podcast
Okay.
where I'm going to interview comedians and get them to. We're going to play one of the jokes, and then I'm going to ask them, "Did that really happen?" And then if the answer is yes, they're going to explain the story behind it. And if the answer is no, then they'll explain how they came up with the joke. So that's going to be. I'm going to start that soon. I've started lining up interviews. Then I'll start with season 8 in January, and then hopefully, if we don't go back into lockdown, which is always a threat, that we could reinstall lockdown here. But if we don't go back into lockdown, hopefully we'll just start doing more and more events. But part of the thing with lockdown as well is we lost a lot of good venues, closed down because they couldn't survive. And for the last year, I'd actually been doing shows at the Hard Rock Cafe here. We had a Hard Rock Cafe, and we were getting like 150 people at those shows, which was just like incredible. And this was all local comedians because we can't have no tourists. So there's no like traveling comedians, just all local ones. And it was an unbelievable venue, like a proper real venue, because most of the shows we do are just like in a bar or something like that with a microphone in the corner. But this was like a proper show. But that closed down during lockdown because the rent where they were was just massive, I think, and they couldn't survive. So now coming out of lockdown, we're trying to figure out what's going to happen with shows because we used to have, like, as I said, 4 shows a month, but now I think it's going to be quite a few months before we build back up to that. So, more podcasts, making more podcasts as well. I now produce 2 podcasts for 2 different companies. Got another one lined up soon.
Well, if they're looking to be roasted by a weird ginger guy from Scotland, put him forward. Like, you could be like, right, the guy's a prick, but he's harmless. Kind of like gonorrhea. It's like he's harmless, we don't want it. Man, I'm really chuffed for you, and how well you're doing over there, and all the podcasts you're setting up. But it's always nice to see one of our own make it, especially in leaving Scotland and making a great life for themselves, and just doing well. But I'm really proud of you, man.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I'll round off this part of the interview with the one question that I ask all my guests.
Yeah.
If you could give one piece of advice to anyone that is struggling with mental health issues at this point in time, what would that piece of advice be, and why?
So I am so unqualified to answer this question.
That's the point.
My piece of advice would be seek professional help. Honestly, I couldn't give you any advice that would make any difference. Really.
Sometimes the simplest is the best. And saying get help, good advice. And that's the whole point. It gets people who say, "Oh, I'm not qualified with mental health." Sometimes they're the best people to ask because they cut through the bullshit and just give you a straight answer, like you did. And it was good.
So I hate those kind of things where it's like, make sure you do yoga in the morning and have your 5 fruit and vegetables a day, and then find some time to make some peace for yourself. Like, these are all fucking like Instagram bullshit answers. Like, I'm not going to give you that. I don't know what to do. It's a hugely challenging, complex issue. And so, I would, again, so to go back to my podcast, one of the guests this season we interviewed, she's a food marketer, but she's very open about her mental health and taking medication for her mental health. So on her Instagram stories and on her social media, she talks about how she has taken Xanax, takes Xanax. She's talked about having panic attacks and blah, blah, blah. So we did a whole episode well, half the episode was about her food marketing because we were talking a lot about food, but then half of the episode was about why she's so open about her mental health. And the reason why is because she wants to break down that stigma. And she talked about how, the first time she had a panic attack, I've never had one myself, but she said, I know kind of I've been explained what it feels like. You don't know what's happening and you feel like you're going to die basically because you're like, oh my God, I can't breathe, my chest is so tight. But then once she found out like it's just a normal thing and it's a panic attack and not everyone, sorry, but lots of people have these, she felt much better.
Yeah, so lots of people have them, but anyone can get them.
Yeah. And so part of her kind of motivation is then to be open about that, so that if someone is maybe having a panic attack for the first time, they're going to be like, "Oh, I saw that Joval explained what this is. I know what's happening right now. I'm, so just try and help people." So we talked about it on the podcast. And again, go back and check it out because it's a whole episode. But that was really interesting. For me, like, I've never had panic attacks or anything like that, and I feel like I'm kind of quite lucky because I know mental health is now. I'm really, really happy that it's so out in the open now from being. I'm a football fan as well. I'm a football guy, so I'm used to being around like men and guys. We drink beer. And,
Who's your team?
Well, that was going to be my question for you. My team is look. Obviously, I've got all my own teeth. I'm quite handsome, and I've got my own job. So I'm clearly a Rangers fan.
Fucking brilliant, man. You really are a comedian. That's brilliant.
Go on, who's your team?
Celtic.
I fucking knew it. As soon as I saw the ginger hair, I was like, that's it.
Oh, fuck off, you stereotypical bastard. I'm an Aston Villa fan as well. That's my English team.
Right. Liverpool's my English team.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Here's one for you.
Go on.
I am a ginger, left-handed Proddy that supports Celtic and has mental health issues. Satan is building my condo as we speak.
I mean, you're fucked.
I'm definitely fucked. Yeah, definitely. But it's quite good because my dad's side are Catholic, my mum's side are Protestant. So I always grew up with that kind of banter about Rangers and Celtic. So I never really knew about sectarianism and stuff because it never bothered me. We were just all mixed up. And then when I found out about it, I was like, all my mates are Rangers fans. What the fuck?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, my family were Protestant, I guess, but I mean, we stopped going to church at 5 years old, so we weren't religious, like we weren't Protestant. And I had friends that were Celtic fans and things like this, so it's kind of similar. I mean, I if we do a whole podcast episode in this, I cringe about the songs I used to sing when I was a Rangers fan, and I cringe about the sectarianism, and it was all just so fake. You probably I don't know if you still use that term in Scotland, but like the weekend bigot. Where you're a bigot on the weekend, and then you go back to your, a lot of them go back to their Catholic wife, and they go back to their, things like this. But on the weekend of the game, they're like, fuck that Pope. And you're like, so now when I've been back, obviously I've visited, and when I go back to see the games, it's quite nice. It's good to see a lot of the songs have changed and things. I obviously I can't really comment on it because I'm not there full time, but a lot of the songs that we used to sing and that I used to sing don't get sung anymore.
Yeah. Well, if we're going to do an episode about that, I'm going to put my name forward for it. Because, I've just explained my credentials, but that would be a very interesting take.
Yeah. Well, it's not really Vietnam related, but anyway, we could try and we'll shoehorn it in.
Hey,
but
I know Scotsman in Vietnam.
That's it.
If you want to get your leash to work, you'll make it work. But yeah,
go back. Your question was about mental health. Sorry, I was going to say I don't know how I got to Rangers and Celtic there, but so I'm quite lucky. I've always felt quite strong in my own mental health. But this lockdown,
that was how we got there. Around like manly football guys.
That's right. Yeah. So it's quite nice that's right. Now it is so open about mental health, and so during this lockdown, for me it was challenging as well. I never had like panic attacks or anxiety, but I had bad days. I had tough times. I had tough
Yeah.
moments. But what I felt was nice is I felt very comfortable reaching out to my guy friends, and I did it often. And I was just like, "Hey, how you doing? Just
Yeah.
like, are you okay? Like, are you coping okay?" And I feel like, as someone who's 39 now, something that would never have been done 20 years ago, but now it's quite okay to be open about your mental health and to
Yeah.
help people and reach out. So, I again go back to your original question about what advice would you give? Yeah, talk to a professional, but just talk to even your friends, I guess, as well. Just reach out for help. Like I tried to do, because I felt like I was in a stronger mental health place than maybe some people. So I was like reaching out, and then I guess that's kind of common advice, but just talk to people as well. Reach out to your friends, reach out to your family, all of that kind of stuff.
No, that's definitely sound advice. Well, I really do appreciate you coming on, man. Well, you're just, well, I can actually say it to you, you're Scottish. You're a sound guy. You're so sound, by the way.
You're pure
That's-
gallants, man.
see this
You're
man?
Pure gallants.
He's some shanter, by the way. Well, all
I
your
do
Vietnamese friends will be like, what the heck is going on here?
I
But
do
no-
miss it.
Yeah, the
I say
banter's
my
always good.
My wife's American, and even every day I'll say something and she'll be like, "What does that mean?" My favourite one, though, I had to teach her. I'll tell you two ones that I've taught her, right? One is, "That's pure bouffing."
Yes!
I said, and one day I just said it randomly, and I was like, "Oh, that's pure bouffing," and she's like, What does that mean?" I was like, "Oh, bouffing is like disgusting." But the
Mm.
other one, right? So you're a football fan, right? So I don't know if this still happens. When I used to go to football, right, we'd get the bus back after the game, and then you're listening to the call-in on the radio, like
Yeah,
phone-in.
super scoreboard.
Yeah, super scoreboard and all that, right? And then someone would call in and they'd criticise a player or they'd say a comment about the game, and then you'd have bloody Davy Provan or whatever be like, "Yeah, but were you at the game, caller?" And half the time they'd be like, "Well, no, I wasn't at the game." Like, "Well, how do you know then?" And then blah blah blah. So anyway, I can't even remember how this crept into our lexicon, but sometimes maybe she'd be saying something or making a point, and I'd be like, "Yeah, but were you at the game, Colin?" So I had to explain it to her, the background and what it means. She, as an American, has no idea about football or Rangers or Celtic, but she will still sometimes, if I'm saying something and I'm rambling, she'll be like, wait, were you at the game, Colin?" It's fucking brilliant. It's one of my favourite things.
In fairness, I've got cousins that live in Canada, and they always ask me about like Scottish, slang phrase, that kind of stuff, what different sayings and that, and they'll be listening to this. So, Paul, you've now heard about bouffing.
There you go. Pure bouffing. Instead of the
Yep. Pure bouffing, by the way.
Pure bouffing, man.
That's how I always used to know if my dad would have a drink in him, because he'd always say, by the way. He'd be like, "Oh, no, I mean it, by the way." Well, by the way. Yeah, always that wee tick.
Before we go, do you want to hear one of my? Do you want me to share one of my Scottish jokes with you?
By the way.
All right. So, do you know how hard it is to teach English as a Scottish person? So
Right.
I'm an English teacher here, and the first day that I ever had to teach English, right? I've never taught it before in my life. I got given a list of jobs that I had to teach. So I looked at the list of jobs, right? And so this is a joke, but this 100% happened. This absolutely happened, right? I looked at the list
Part
of
of
jobs.
this for your podcasting.
Yeah, exactly, right. I looked at the list of jobs, and I was like, policeman, all right, okay, no problem. Pilot, yep, no worries. Looked at the next one. Oh, for fuck's sake. Journalist. Now, as a Scotsman, any word with R in the middle, burger, murder, squirmy, curly, worms. Any word with R in the middle is fuck. So I'm like, journalist, fuck's sake. So I have to say to 20 Vietnamese kids, "Okay, everyone, repeat after me, journalist." Now, I swear to God, when I do this at comedy shows, I tell this joke at comedy shows, and I say, "journalist," and you see half the people people in the room who are mostly American with blank looks on their face, and I'll often hear them say to the person next to them, "What did you just say? Junglist? What's a junglist?" All the time.
Oh, man.
So you imagine 20 kids all being like, "Junglist." But what I feel bad for is that kid that went home that day, and his dad said, "Mom, what did you learn in school today, son?" I don't know whether dad's Scottish, but I can't speak Vietnamese, so the dad's Scottish. What did you learn in school today, son? "Oh, we learned jobs." He's Scottish as well now. "Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up, son?" "Well, I want to be a journalist." The dad's like, "What the fuck is that? I'm not sending you back to that school. That school's a waste of money. What the fuck is a junglist?"
Oh my god, that's absolutely brilliant. But I'm betting you're glad that you had that Scotsman that could really laugh at that.
I'm glad you did. Yeah, I'm glad you did. It's
Oh
good to-
man,
I
that
did.
is-
I
that
went.
is brilliant.
I went back to Glasgow a few years ago and I did an open mic night and it was good. I was cause interested, if some of my jokes would translate because I've only ever done comedy in Vietnam, but it got a good laugh. So that's pretty good. So I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. But Neil, you are absolutely hilarious, and you're such a nice guy as well. Well, I'm
Thanks very
really happy that you came on. Well, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me. I was excited to be on.
Yeah. So we'll move on to Vietnam's favourite segment, Ask Andrew Anything. Now, you've already asked me a question, but I'm
Yeah,
going to try and
well,
bring
that
it to
was
spot
gonna be
another one.
That was going to be my question: is who's your football team? But you got it already. But
Yeah.
um,
So for anybody that's listening, this is when I ask my guests any question. What? No, repeat. This is how good you are. You threw me off my floor. But this is when, after interviewing my guest for 56 minutes and 45 seconds, this is when the guest gets to put it round and ask me a question. And it could be about anything. It could be, who's your favourite football team? To who would win in a fight between a genetically modified starfish or hot dog flavoured water? One does get right there. So, do you have another question for this mental ginger?
I do. All right, this is a bit of it's like an aptitude question that I read many years ago. It's quite interesting. Okay,
Oh fuck.
or it's kind of like creativity question almost. All right.
Again, oh
How
fuck.
many uses can you think of for a brick?
For a brick?
Yeah.
Well, being Scottish, one is definitely like slamming it in someone's face.
Oh, yes, one.
Well, then you're building a house.
Two.
It could be a pet. What? Because have you ever seen Father Ted? Father Jack had the pet brick. You put it on the accelerator. I'm just going to nick all the stuff in Father Ted now.
That's a good one. Okay, that's four. All right.
They could have used throwing it someday.
Five.
You could use it as a footstool. So let's specifically for one leg.
Okay.
Unless you have two bricks, you never specify the quantity.
One brick.
Just one brick. Okay.
One.
So it could be a footstool for an amputee.
I did specify the quantity. I said a brick. That is
A
one
brick.
brick.
Remember, we're Scottish.
Yeah.
We have to have it very, very, very specifically explained.
I'm an English teacher. It's a brick. It's one
Yeah.
brick.
You could also use it to prop up your mobile phone.
Okay.
You could use it as a weight for a microphone.
Okay. Okay.
You could use it to prop up your laptop.
Okay. Nice.
You could use it for your kids to play with.
Okay.
You could definitely use it. I've got 23-year-olds. If I put a brick in the middle of the floor, they can't lift it, but they will do their damnedest best to try. They'll be there for days. So we could definitely use that. You use it to put stationery in, because you've got a wee hole bit in the middle.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. All
Put
right.
your stationery stuff in.
Yeah.
And you could use it as a paperweight.
Yes,
You could use it to put your salt and pepper on. Again, the wee hole.
Yeah.
I'm just looking around my dining room and I'm like what can I use in here? And over at the side of me is the house. So I was like, there's the brick. You can also use it to put on top of it like your weeds out in the grass. So that way no sunlight gets in them. and they don't fucking go back.
Okay.
But you can use it for paving your driveway. We tried to do that, and yeah, the driveway got fucked. Well, so now it's just play area for kids. Play area. There we go.
16.
Right. You could use it as right. Let's specify the weight of the brick.
Just a normal red brick.
Just normal red brick.
Yeah.
Okay. It could also be used as a chew toy for like, a dog or whatever. Well,
I got a dog. I would not let my dog use a brick as a chew toy.
well, what if they're like really like weird mutated dogs, and they've got like teeth that could potentially like rip your head off? Like you'd want to gnaw them down, make sure that you know if it would just be a little bite, rather than getting sent to A&E and dying. What else? There's plenty. Try to think of things that my wife could have used them on the farm.
Let's even get 2 more, otherwise we'll be here for another hour.
Yeah, probably because it is. I can think of the most random things.
See, you're good at this. I think the first time I got asked this question, I could think of about like 2 things. So I think the question is about like your kind of creativity and your thinking outside the box. And the more you can think of is the more you can think outside the box. So I'm not really too good
Well,
at
here's another one.
lateral thinking. Go on.
You could put it in a box and mail it to somebody. That's me also thinking inside the box. And I'll use the last one. You can use it to break someone's legs gangster style.
There you go. Kneecapping.
Kneecapping, definitely. Oh, that's Scotsman right there. Well, thank you for that very interesting question. I think I might have to go back to therapy. But you know, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. But tell my listeners where we can find all your stuff.
Oh yeah, cheers. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I know we talked about maybe some of your episodes coming about half an hour.
Yeah, we're an hour and 1 minute and 48 seconds.
None of my podcast episodes come in under about an hour. I blame it on being Scottish. I just can't help it. I love to talk. Love having
Doesn't matter, man.
So sorry I've talked so much.
It's been brilliant. But the hour has flown by. Well, my wife would just be like, why the fuck have you not made my coffee yet?
This is what I find on my podcast. I'm like, I should try and make them shorter, but every time I interview someone that lasts an hour.
Well, sometimes it depends on the guest as well. Sometimes the guest can be like, trying to pull one out of a brick. Here's another one.
There you go. In 7 seasons.
And it can be like, oh my god, we can't get in now. Whereas we're just having banter, it's flowing, we're good gaps, and the hour just flies by.
In all my 7 seasons, I've interviewed about 65 guests.
Wow.
There was only one where I almost wanted to just end it because I was just asking him questions and he kept giving like one word answers and I was like, you need to because most of every other one of my guests, when I ask a question, they just talk and talk and talk, just like I'm doing right now, and it's amazing. And I sit back and I listen and I love it. But this one guy, it was literally like getting blood from a stone, getting blood from a brick. And I was almost at one point, I was almost going to be like, look, should we just finish this? Because if you're not going to answer, if you're not going to like expand more than yes or no, then. But eventually, I was like, I used it as a challenge to myself in my head. I was like, okay, no, this is your challenge as an interviewer, as a podcast host. You need to get him to talk. So I just kind of kept probing, and eventually we got a conversation. But anyway, yeah, you can please follow 7 Million Bikes on Instagram, just 7_million_bikes, on Facebook as well. Check out the website, 7millionbikes.com. We got a blog on there, which has heaps of stuff on there about podcasting, about comedy, about our guests and things like this. You can check it out on YouTube as well. We're on 7 Million Bikes as well. You can see some of the comedy on there as well. You can check out the podcast as well. And if you listen and you like this, send me a message. It's my favorite thing in the world is when someone sends the 7 Million Bikes page a message saying like, hey, I listened to you and that was cool. It's the most amazing thing ever.
Yep, definitely. But message them. Because it's funny as fuck. So until next time, my 6 people followers, I have been Andrew Durning. This has been the talented, funny motherfucker. As Niall Mackay. You can use that in your review. One talented motherfucker. That made it much interesting.
Thank you. And you got my name right. Thank you very much.
Well, I tried. I'm still on the losing streak of fucking everybody's name up. So maybe I'll get the next one right.
You gotta ask before you start recording. But I should have told you.
But in fairness, these people do tell me, and I still fuck it up.
Yeah.
So then I have to apologise to the entire country. So it's like when I had on, she was American and she married a Swedish guy. Her name is Mia Vida, and I fucked it up majorly. And she was like, "Oh, there's only 15 of them." And I went, "Okay, so the other 14, I'm sorry." So until next time, my faithful followers, take care, stay safe, bye bye.